entitled Smarter Compliance, Tackling No Access Challenges in the Housing Sector. In terms of how today is going to go, my name's Luca. I'm one of the business development managers at Voicescape. And we're going to be joined today by one of our amazing customers, Chris Marshall, Chief Operating Officer for Railway Housing Association. In terms of the format for the webinar, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about Voicescape, a little bit of background to who we are, and then also some of the challenges the sector's facing right now. And I'm sure a lot of them will be very familiar to those in attendance today. I'll then talk about a little bit about the solution, how it works, and why organisations are choosing Voicescape Compliance to support them in those challenges. I'll share a little bit about the success stories that our existing customers are achieving right now using the solution, and then I'll hand over to Chris Marshall to talk a little bit about why railway housing chose compliance and the outcomes, the impact it's had on the organisation and the team. And then lastly, to round off, we'll have some Q&A session and a bit of a summary. So with that in mind, if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And then at the end, we'll run through them. I'll also have some polls going throughout the webinar. So if you can also engage with those polls and answer them, and please engage with the webinar, that'd be amazing. If there are any questions that I miss or don't get time to answer, we'll make sure we follow up at the end and reach out with the answers for you. But without further ado, let's get stuck in. So a little bit about Voicescape then. So who are we? So we have been in the sector over 20 years now, and we only work in the social housing sector. So our whole focus is supporting housing associations and local authorities with engagement. So today's webinar is centered around Voicescape Compliance, which you can see in that nice yellow circle. But actually, we have 7 pieces of software, all designed to increase engagement and to support housing associations and local authorities with that engagement. So if you can think about any instance in the business where you have to reach out to a tenant, whether that's to get feedback, whether it's to support vulnerable tenants in the community, whether it's to support people in their arrears, we will have a solution designed to do that. So we've got a wellbeing solution, which is designed to support vulnerable tenants. We've got a feedback solution, which is designed to increase response rates to your surveys and increase the richness of that data that you receive so we can affect change. And we've got an income stack centered around supporting your officers with their caseloads, but also about supporting tenants in the arrears process. And of course, it will be, it's important as well to highlight our newest piece of software, Agreements Manager, which builds on the success of Caseload Manager and looks at supporting organisations with payment arrangements. So if there's anything that I have said that you think you might be interested in, that might tickle your fancy, you might have a colleague in the organisation that you might think would be interested in any of them, feel free just to let us know and we can send you some information. But of course, today's webinar is about Voicescape Compliance. So what are some of the challenges in the sector that organisations are facing today? So I'd like to say there's sort of like 2 camps of challenges, if we can even phrase it that way. There's historical challenges, and then there's more current challenges. So it goes without saying that a lot of housing associations and local authorities are already, or are still, dealing with the fallout of the COVID pandemic. So as you'll remember, lots of organisations stopped all of their general repairs and focused entirely on their emergency repairs, and rightly so. But of course, what that meant is that a lot of organisations still have historical repairs that they're trying to work through and that they're trying to engage with. Of course, if we also couple that with the financial pressures that organisations have been dealing with, we've had high levels of inflation, we've had high levels of labour costs, higher material costs, and again, all of these make it difficult or make it harder for organisations to carry out those repairs, to carry out those compliance checks, and to engage with those tenants. Couple that now with the introduction of consumer regulations and the upcoming introduction of AWAB's law. And of course, organisations' own goals and aspirations around, providing safe and well-maintained homes, engaging more with the tenants, and of course, not just about carrying out repairs like damp, mold and condensation, but also about that follow-on support that you provide. So checking back in after the appointment's being made to make sure that repair is carried out, the damp, mold and condensation has gone, and that the property remains safe, well maintained as well. So all of these challenges right now the sector is facing. And I guess the question organisations are asking themselves is, to deal with those challenges, do we either grow our teams, so recruit more, increase resource, which comes with their own challenges around managing more people, and it's usually quite costly to recruit more, or do we implement or utilize technology to support our existing team? And I think a lot of organizations recognize that the teams that they have today are brilliant at what they do. When they are engaging with the tenants, that's the best work for them. But to get to that point is a lot of unproductive and time-consuming work in the background. So organizations are asking themselves, well, how do we protect that resource for the officers to continue to do what they do brilliantly, and maybe perhaps as a technology that can pick up the heavy lifting in the background. And that is where VoiceGate Compliance comes in, and that's where our existing customers have already made that decision to utilize technology to support their existing team. Now, how does that work in practice, of course? So there's many use cases for VoiceGate Compliance, and there we go, it wasn't moving on then, that was weird. There's many use cases for VoiceGate Compliance, and I think actually you can condense it simply to any instance where you need to make an appointment with a tenant, either to gain access to their property or to carry out a repair. VoiceGate Compliance is designed to do that. It's designed to make it easier for you to do that. So our customers right now are using it for gas and electrical service appointments. They're using it for responsive repairs and planned maintenance. And again, like I said on the previous slide, they're now also using it for damp, mold and condensation, not only just to book the appointment, but also then to reach out after that appointment 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 12 months later, to make sure that that problem hasn't reoccurred and that problem has been resolved. And ultimately, the solution is designed to reduce costly no access in those instances. So what organizations don't want is for people to send out engineers to carry out those repairs and the tenant not be available. They've either missed the appointment, they've forgotten about it, and ultimately that is a cost to the association. And if you think right now in your process where you might have to book that appointment, that is typically an officer either ringing up the tenant, either sending a text message, could be sending letters, it could be a multitude of those instances. And ultimately, that's all time for that officer. And, if we're talking about telephone calls, it might take them 4, 5, 6 attempts to get hold of Mrs. Smith to book that appointment. If you're sending letters, you've no idea if Mrs. Smith is reading them, if it's being delivered on time. And for organizations, it's about understanding if there's a better way to do that. And that's where the technology comes in. So it optimizes that booking process. It gives organizations the opportunity to engage more with the tenant ahead of time in an automated way without it impacting officers' resource. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works now. So regardless of what the appointment is, when you share the data with us, to get the system up and running, as a bare minimum, we just need a tenant reference number and a telephone number to point the call to. But there's lots of useful things that you can do within the data that our system can recognize and change the outcome. So, for example, if you wanted us to engage with a tenant in a different language, we can do that. But typically how it works is when you share that data with us and the system's turned on, we will start doing that heavy lifting for you. So whereas now your officers might be trying 4, 5, 6, 7 times to get hold of Mrs. Smith, the technology is going to do that for you in the background, and it's going to free you up to have those conversations with tenants who are available. Now, how that works is, as standard, we will purchase local numbers for wherever your tenants are based in the country. So whether they're based in Manchester, Glasgow, Sheffield, Cornwall, whatever area they're in, we will purchase a local number so that when we're reaching out to that tenant, rather than them seeing an 0800 number or an 033 number, which they might think is a sales call, they might think is a cold call, they're going to see a local number, and that's going to encourage them to engage more with the service. And ultimately, that's what the technology is designed to do, is to increase the trust within the system and increase the opportunity for them to engage. And just as we purchase that local number, when Mrs. Smith answers that phone, she'll then listen to a message. And again, we'll get your team to record those messages because we want them to hear a local voice, familiar accent, We want them to perhaps even engage with the officer that they're used to engaging with. And again, that familiarity within the system encourages that engagement. And the beauty is, if it's taken the system 7 attempts, that's absolutely fine because it doesn't impact your resource when we get hold of that tenant. The type of the message depends on what the appointment is, and it depends on what the outcome you want as well. So, for example, some organisations are very prescriptive in their appointment setting. So it could be something as simple as, hello, this is a call from ABC Housing. We're calling as your property is due a gas safety inspection. Your appointment is scheduled for Tuesday, the 15th of July, 2024. That's in the past. It should say 2025 at 2 p.m. Please press 1 to confirm now or 9 to reschedule. And what that creates is 2 lists automatically. Here's a list of all the people who are available and ready for that appointment, and perhaps here's a list of people who aren't available. And for the officers then, it gives them the time to bring them back and reschedule that appointment. There is also lots of other things you can do within the system. So it could be actually that you go, please press 1 to speak to confirm the appointment, or press 9 to speak with an officer to reschedule. And what that does is it means that rather than that officer making those 7 attempts to get hold of Mrs. Smith, only on the 7th successful attempt that our system has made that call, do we transfer it through to the officer for them to do what they do best. And that's to support the tenant to book the appointment or reschedule it. But the beauty is they haven't had to do that unproductive outbound trying to get hold of the tenant. They're only engaging with them at the point that they are ready and engaged. And of course, that works in a consultative way as well. So it could be that actually you just want to reach out to tenants to let them know that they have an appointment or that they need to book an appointment. And let's transfer through to the officer to make that happen now. And like I said, the message could be, this is a call from ABC Housing. We're calling as your property is due a gas safety inspection. We can help you today. Please press 1 to book a suitable appointment now. This call is free of charge. And again, for when your officers are turning that system on and we're getting hold of those tenants, it's allowing them to transfer through to the officer at a time that's convenient for them. It's a better experience for the tenant because they're engaging in a way that suits them. And it's a better experience for the officer because now the officer's not doing lots of outbound cold, trying to get hold of, and instead it's having lots of warm inbound from tenants who are saying, hey, I'm here, I'm ready, I need to book that appointment. And you see a shift in performance because of that. You see a lot more happier officers because they're doing lots of successful, productive work and less of that outbound, unproductive cold calling instead. The other great thing about the technology is that you can also use it to be more proactive. So not just in booking appointments, but also about sharing useful information with tenants. So you can create campaigns within the system. So you might want to share information about damp and mold. You might want to signpost people to support about fuel poverty. You might want to just remind them that you're there and that you're available should they need to reschedule the appointment. And again, whereas right now that might be a physical officer's job to send those text messages, to make those calls, to disseminate that information, with the technology, you can do that concurrently in the background. So you can send out text messages to all of your tenants about damp and mold or about fuel poverty support in a way that it doesn't impact your staff's resource, freeing them up to do what they do best, which is often a multitude of other things within their role, not just about rescheduling the appointment. The other thing with the system is for anybody we can't get in touch with on the phone, we'll always automatically follow up with a text message and a voicemail to give them the opportunity to ring back or to create routes back into the organisation. And that's really important. Sometimes we see that organisations aren't easily set up to engage in a way that tenants prefer. You know, I might like to speak on the phone. My neighbour might like to communicate by text message. And often it's not very easy to provide that straight away. Whereas with the system, as standard, we'll lead with voice in the first instance because we know that gets the highest level of engagement. But if we can't capture them on the voice call, we'll follow up with that text message, we'll follow up with the voicemail. And within those text messages, it can provide them routes back into the organisation to reschedule that. The other thing it allows you to do, as I spoke about previously, it also allows you to be consistent in your outreach to those tenants to remind them about those upcoming appointments. So whereby now you might book an appointment 3 weeks or a month in advance, and then you need to ring out again a week before, and you might need to ring out again the day before to remind that tenant. And sometimes you might not have the resource to do that because you're dealing with those other challenges within the sector. Those are the pressures going on. The technology through intelligent automation allows you to do that straight away. So you can set the system up to go, I'm going to reach out to tell them about that first appointment. I'm then going to follow up 2 weeks before the appointment, just to remind Mrs. Smith and keep her involved, keep her engaged with the process. And then I'm going to send her a text the day before. And in each of those instances that I reach out to that tenant with automation, I'm also going to give them the opportunity to reconfirm the appointment or reschedule the appointment. And what we find is by having that consistent contact in an automated way without it affecting the resource of the officers, it keeps that tenant engaged, keeps them informed, and they're then less likely to either miss the appointment or forget it altogether. And ultimately, what that does is it reduces no access rates. Engineers are going out, staff are going out, and the tenant is there and available at the property, and they're getting access first time. And that's ultimately what the system's designed to do. Now, let me share some success with you. So just some success from our existing customers. So Progress Housing, 29% reduction in no access rates for gas and electric safety checks. And also the service satisfaction was above 95%. And that's the important thing. When you provide a system that enables tenants to engage in a way that suits them, you find that tenants have a much better customer experience. You know, they're much more involved, they're much more engaged because we're doing that in a way that suits them. And we know because of the consumer regulations, there's a requirement for organisations to make it easy for tenants to access services, but also make it easy for them to feedback about those services as well. And this technology supports you in achieving that. Platform Housing Group reduced the rate of no access appointments by 56% and recently picked up Heating Service Team of the Year at the ASCP Safety and Compliance Awards as well. So we were able to support that team to reduce their no access, and in return they got Best Servicing Team at the ASCP conference, which is an amazing thing to be able to support them with. Rooftop Housing, no access rates dropped from 28% to 15%, so that's a 45% reduction. And again, that's as well as customer satisfaction significantly increasing. And our most recent customer to start utilising VoiceGate compliance, Adra in Wales, no access rates dropped from 8.7% to 4.7% during the responsive repairs campaign. So they're using our appointment solution for responsive repairs, and they saw a 46% reduction. And that's the brilliant thing with the technology. It picks up the unproductive, time-consuming task of trying to get hold of customers, trying to keep them in the loop, trying to keep them informed, and it frees up your officers' time to do what they do best. And the outcome of that is black and white, it's increased performance, it's a reduction in no access. And that's as simple as it is. Now, what does that mean? For us, some shameless self-promotion. It means that actually this year we won Best Supplier to the social housing sector at the ASCP 2025 conference. We also won the NMHF Most Innovative Property Service with Progress Housing Group as well. And we're really keen to work with our customers. I often like to say it's not a customer-supplier relationship, it's more of a partnership. We want you to get the best out of our solutions, but we also want you to feedback in how we can change them or how we can support you to do other things. And that's what we're achieving right now with our existing customer base. And that brings me very nicely on to Chris Marshall at Railway to talk about his experience.
Hi, thanks, Luca. Hi everyone, thanks for your time this morning. So as Luca said, my name is Chris Marshall. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for our Railway Housing Association. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to talk to you too much about trains this morning, despite that picture on the screen there. But let me just give you a bit of background to the organisation. So the organisation is over 100 years old, and we were founded as part of the Homes for Heroes campaign. And this was really about providing homes for railway workers, widows and orphan children from people that had been away fighting in the First World War. So a huge long-standing history and a great legacy of providing really high-quality accommodation. The North Eastern Railway at the time, plus 34,700 railway workers, donated to a fund that enabled the construction of the first homes, and also a huge donation from Lady Ellen Granger. And Lady Ellen Granger's brother was the occupational doctor for the railway at the time. And when he passed away, she made a big donation in his memory, which enabled the first homes to be built. So we own and manage 1,600 homes. We've got quite a wide geographical footprint from Berwick on the Scottish borders down to Hereford, which brings with it its own challenges, as we'll come to. So this map just gives you some idea of the geographical footprint of our organisation, and you'll have realised that with only 1,600 homes, actually in some of those areas our footprint is really small. So that brings with it some real significant challenges around access, around convenience, around appointments. And I'll talk you through how VoiceScale helps us to mitigate some of those challenges. The organisation had a new chief exec in April of 23, so just over 2 years ago now. And as part of that process, there was some turning over of stones, and the organisation referred itself to the regulator in June 2023, following concerns around internal controls, but also really importantly around the asset data. So our stock condition data just wasn't robust and wasn't good enough. And the regulator, rightly so, downgraded the organisation to G2, and a full governance review and improvement plan was implemented and has now been delivered. Now, one of the key outcomes of that was restructuring of the organisation. So the executive team was restructured in December 23. And that was about bringing together the asset and resident experience approaches into one place, because there's some real synergies, and really important to have that experience thread across all of the delivery of our operations. And then we subsequently moved that restructure through the rest of the organisation to change the way we're set up to better face some of the challenges that Luke talked about earlier, and how those challenges impact, particularly on a small organisation like we are. So that 12-month improvement plan was approved by our board back in March 24, and we love a railway pun, so it's appropriately called On the Right Track. We've now extended that by a further year. Now those priorities are really heavily focused on the organisation being regulatory compliant, but really shaped by resident feedback. So real clear resident voice throughout all of those priorities. And really importantly in this arena around compliance, so how do we make people feel safe in their home? How do we engage with residents so that access isn't an issue, and people understand what we're doing and how we're really clear about that, and the reason we need to carry out this kind of service and work to keep people safe in their homes. That plan has created us with 4 key foundations for the organisation, and these won't be dramatically different to a lot of your priorities around how we deliver a great experience, how we have great homes, that the organisation's well run, and that we have the right culture and the right people as part of the team. And the board have set our very long-term ambition to be the country's best small housing provider. The caveat to that is between 1,000 and 2,000 homes. In order for us to get there, you're talking about a 20% increase in some of our satisfaction measures, which is quite a large jump for us to make, and it is a long-term aim. One of the things that's really important, though, is we needed to have the right people in the right places and the right values and behaviours driving that. And we moved through the organisation in September of last year with a restructure, and that was about having more resources in property, delivering a new generic community housing service, and we've also created a new resident hub. So that's our first point of contact resolution for residents. Contacting us in any format is now handled by the hub. We've also strengthened our approach around complaint handling and IT, but also really clear the cultural changes required for the organisation. So in terms of how that journey translates from an asset and a compliance point of view, so the organisation has generally had a robust approach to landlord health and safety in the past. And in 2023, an external consultant reviewed all of our approach to compliance and gave us a reasonable assurance rating at the time, with an action plan for some areas to strengthen. We do deliver our gas servicing in-house, so it is the only element of our repairs and maintenance and servicing program that is in-house. All of the other contracts and work is delivered externally. We approved a new asset management strategy at the beginning of this year, and that really set the vision for the organisation around compliance and set some really stringent targets around 100% across all of our compliance areas. And then the actions of how we make sure that we can achieve that are further upstream. And also the asset management strategy now sets the direction of how we'll use technology and also how we explore AI to support compliance, servicing, and also the admin arrangements around that. We do have some dedicated compliance resources who are solely focused on making sure that our servicing programs are robust and that we work closely with our contractors and delivery partners to get access to properties and get those services done. And we had an internal audit in January this year, and again, a reasonable assurance opinion, which is really positive for where we're at as an organisation in quite a large change journey where we've changed quite a lot in the last 12 months. In terms of our tenant satisfaction measures, hugely helpful source of data, and we've now got a huge number of our residents, 40% of our residents have now been surveyed in there. And we know that the main driver for satisfaction for railway residents is a well-maintained home. But there's a really clear link that if people feel safe in their home, their overall satisfaction is really high as well. So with an organisation of limited bandwidth and limited resources, it's about where can we prioritise the improvements that make the biggest impact for residents and the biggest improvement in satisfaction. And we know that maintaining homes well, but also making people feel safe, particularly in a compliance world, is really helpful. These are positive results for railway, however, they're not good enough for us to achieve our long-term vision. And I appreciate this probably looks very small on your screen there, but just to pull out some of the kind of second, third and fourth measure there, you can see where our satisfaction for TSMs are. This is national data presented by the RSH. So you can see for the vast majority of our repairs, and particularly for our safety at TP05, that actually people feel very safe, and we're in the top quartiles for most of those areas. The board have that ambition to be number one. So in order to move us to there, we know we need to move those measures still quite significantly. But it absolutely is a balancing act, and this is a huge balance for smaller providers. So as somebody who's worked in my previous organisation was 36,000 homes to a very small organisation, there's a big challenge for smaller providers because the responsibilities are the same. We've got the same responsibilities, the same legal framework, often with significantly less resource to be able to deliver that. And that is where the use of the technology and streamlining, removing those wasteful activities really helps to sharpen your resources and make those resources available for the areas that you need to target that on. Our geographical footprint absolutely plays a role in the balance for us. We are very spread out, and because we still deliver that gas servicing in-house, our engineer will spend a disproportionate amount of time on the road travelling, and that's something we need to look at for the future on how we best deliver that service. And the organisation is also, we're playing catch up to modernise some of our processes. So there's been very little change in the organisation before the last 2 years. So some of our processes are still very letter driven and still very traditional. And we're currently working through that modernisation piece. Third-party auditing programs are really important for us because we've got that in-house resource. We need that assurance that work is of a good quality and that we're picking everything up that we should do. But again, linked to those challenges of resources, the remedial and mitigating actions, that can take quite a lot of time to think about, to consider how you plan and deliver that, particularly around things like fire, risk assessment remedials, and also remedials from your electrical and gas servicing programs as well. And just keeping an eye on that with a limited resources is a challenge. So how VoiceScape helps us. So we introduced VoiceScape in last year for gas servicing as our first servicing program, and that has significantly reduced our no access rates. Now, I haven't got a number on the screen there on purpose because, as you'll appreciate from the size of our program, is probably very small compared to some of your organizations. And I think the number is it's slightly skewed. Certainly, this has had a massive impact for us because it's enabled us to avoid travel time. So we've been able to avoid having an engineer on the road, potentially driving for 2 hours to get to a servicing appointment where the resident isn't there. And we've absolutely got those real life case studies where the ability of the technology and the offer that residents can engage when they want to engage really means that we've seen more people contact us to rearrange appointments than when we just used letters as our contact method. So actually, because of those reminders and because the technology's in your hand now and the voice principles of VoiceScape really help to drive that engagement, and it is much more convenient for people to tell you when they're not going to be in, which means you can replan and be much more effective, and it's had a huge impact for us. It's absolutely improved our resident experience as well. So I wouldn't just think about this as how this saves you money. Really think about how it can drive better engagement and a better experience for residents. We were starting from quite a low bar, so we didn't really use text messaging across the board or reminders for things. This has really helped us to do that, and the feedback from our residents has been really, really positive, that they've really appreciated those reminders. And again, life happens, doesn't it? Things get in the way. When you initially got that first call for the appointment, it might have been fine, but something's come up. Actually, that reminder principle has really helped people to get in touch with us to say, actually, I'm really sorry, I'm not going to be in now. That's okay, we can reprogram it. We'd much rather know. We're about to roll it out for electrical testing, so we're just reprocuring our electrical testing contractor, and part of the contract will be to engage in the system again, so we can drive up that consistency of the service and consistency of the experience, as well as the efficiencies through there. And it's also helping us to drive cultural change inside the organisation, of that concept of being more proactive with our communication across a range of things that we do, not just compliance servicing, but how do we use that technology better to engage with residents and be more, come and deliver the service at a time that's convenient and appropriate to residents. From the perception of residents, it's absolutely improved their experience with us. We've had some really positive feedback from residents on people who've rang in, people who've spoke to the engineer when we've gone to deliver the gas service appointment, that those reminders and that opportunity to engage when it is best for the resident has made a significant improvement in how people have perceived the service. It's also great about giving people access to choice. So for us, this was never about forcing people to use digital technology or forcing people down one route. The benefit of compliance gives you the opportunity for residents to engage by voice or by text, and with the opportunity to always speak to somebody. If people don't want to engage with the system, absolutely, you've still got that fallback position of having a conversation. It's also really helped us to refresh some of our contact information. So the analytics you get from behind the system, that as the system is trying to contact people, it will tell you if those numbers are no longer connected to a mobile phone network. And that's really helped us to refresh some of that data, understand where the data isn't great, and then we can go out and improve that and get up-to-date data. We've had some really high engagement rates with it. So the number of people that listen to the messages that confirm appointments or contact us to rearrange is really high. And it was probably higher than we expected. And because the vast majority of our resident population is retirement living, there was a perception among some colleagues that, well, old people don't do technology. And just to be really clear, that's absolutely not the case. And this has really proven that the technology has been really helpful and very much appreciated. I also argue, though, that you've got some much wider opportunities than compliance. So the overall VoiceScape proposition that Luke talked about earlier on, and the ability to add on those different modules, I think is really helpful in delivering that consistency of engagement with residents. So as well as compliance, we are using the feedback module to collect satisfaction. We're also using the engage module to help with some direct engagement with residents. And because your residents get used to the system, they get used to that's the way we're going to communicate. Actually, you can see those engagement rates going up. And in our first ever feedback or satisfaction survey we did, and this was for people who made a complaint in the last quarter with us, we got over a 75% engagement rate in that. Now you compare that to a paper-based survey where you're probably lucky to get 20%. So the value of that consistent engagement is really helpful. So I think I would try and encourage you not just think about it in one format of gas servicing or compliance, actually think about the ability that it brings. It also, as Luca touched on earlier as well, think about this as appointments. And I know, because I've been in the same situation that some of you will be in now, of how do you get a business case over the line? How do you get somebody to agree to fund this? And how can you evidence that? And one of the things I would argue is that although it's called VoiceScape compliance, this is really about engagement and appointment booking. And go and talk to your colleagues in bigger organizations about where else do you use appointments and how you can develop that joint business case. So it's not just around gas or electric. Actually, for us, the next step for us will be to use this module for an annual resident visit. So we're visiting everybody once a year to update data, check condition of property, and also for how we use stock condition surveys. So when you think about all of those potential use cases, it really helps to stack the business case up. So it's relatively easy for me with all of those areas in my responsibility. I can see and direct that. Where you are in a bigger organization, and having come from a bigger organization where sometimes you struggle to get those business cases approved, is go and talk to your colleagues about what else can you use appointments for, and can you consider that across the organization. And I'm going to stop there and leave plenty of time for questions, because I'm sure there will be some questions. But hopefully that's been really helpful. Please ask all your questions. And if anyone wants to get in touch after, then just reach out. I'm sure I will be sharing some contact details if you need them.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's amazing to see not only what compliance is doing, but also that sort of wider those wider goals and those wider aspirations. So obviously it's really brilliant to be part of that sort of journey with railway housing as well. I do have some questions for you, Chris. So I will ask you them in just a second, but I'll just remind people, if you do have questions for Chris, as he's just said, if you just pop them in the chat, and we'll go through them at the end. I'll just quickly summarize, and then that gives people to write some questions if they have them, and then Chris, I can ask you some as well. I will say I had a lot more questions, but as you went through, you kept answering them, so that was clearly a sign of a great presentation. So yes, thank you for that. But yeah, I guess in summary then, so as Chris has mentioned, the whole solution is designed to optimize that process for you, and to allow officers to have the success that they're really good at without that unproductive outbound activity going on. And often we'll see with our existing customer base that they'll have an average of a 20 to 30% reduction in no access. And there's also, of course, a cost saving as well. Typically we find organisations, it costs them between £50 to £75 on average every time they send that engineer out and that person's not available. And of course, it reduces the instance where you might have to send letters out as well, which all has a cost associated to it. But I would also encourage organisations in the way that Chris has brilliantly done to think also of the wider picture as well, especially with the new consumer regulations. Yes, there is an opportunity to save money by using compliance, but there's also a really brilliant opportunity to increase the experience for the tenant, to make a much better experience for the tenant, to provide them way more opportunity to engage with you, and also importantly to create a better experience for your officers as well and for your teams. And I think that's just as important. Often, if you can imagine as an officer who's having to make those calls, and every 10 calls they might speak to a tenant, that over time that can be quite demoralizing. And I think when you give officers the tools to do what they do best with technology, you immediately see a better experience for those officers as well. And that's what we're really keen on doing. We're really keen on supporting organizations to achieve their goals, but also to provide a better experience for those tenants as well. So With that in mind, I've just had a poll pop up, so let me just pop that up. So we'll go through the questions first, Chris, and then I'll just end on mine. So Barry has just asked, was there any issues setting the system up? And I guess that's for you, Chris. But I'm
thanks, Barry. Great question. I think the setup of the system is very easy and very straightforward. Essentially, once you have decided to proceed, VoiceGive will essentially guide you through what is a relatively straightforward setup form, and it's also really consistent across all modules. So if you use multiple modules, it's a very consistent and helpful form. But essentially, because the system sits outside of your IT infrastructure, there is the essentially you've got a few different options. We still manually upload the data, so we'll create a data file in Excel and we'll upload that into the system. Although there are opportunities, and certainly where I used to work with you, we've automated the transfer of data straight into the system automatically. So in terms of system setup, I think it's really easy. In terms of the speed of that, I think we went from just signing the agreement to or once we started the setup, probably live within 5 to 6 weeks. But I'll let VoiceGive hold them to those timescales, not me, and answer that particular question. So I think the setup was really straightforward, relatively quick, easy to deploy. And I think one of the challenges you have with IT sometimes is you need your own IT resource to be involved. Actually, this has a very limited impact on your IT infrastructure. More impact if you're going to automate the data flow, but certainly for us, nobody from our IT team was involved in this setup because we didn't need them to be.
Perfect, thanks, Chris. And yeah, I guess I'll touch upon that. So yeah, it was really amazing. Railway housing got set up really quickly within, I think Chris said, about 5-6 weeks. Typically, we say to organisations it's about an 8-week implementation. But of course, we work with each organisation on an individual basis. So if people can move quicker and they've got the resource available and they want to get going quicker, then we can, of course, deliver it in those timeframes, as Chris has sort of already said. But sometimes as well, organisations like to take a little bit longer, or it might be whatever works for them ultimately. But typically, we say about 8 weeks, and we take your lead. In terms of the data, so I know Craig Parkinson's asked, does it integrate with housing management systems like MRI, etc.? Yes, we're agnostic to housing management systems. We don't like to put up barriers for you to not use our software. So we will work with you as part of that implementation to integrate with your housing management system. So all of that outbound engagement, all of that data that Chris was talking about, that information, that rich information about valid or invalid numbers, people who are listening to the messages, hanging up, etc. We can send that back into your housing management system as a flat file. And equally, in terms of that data share, as Chris said, some organisations just manually share that data, and that works for them, especially if they perhaps don't have that IT resource. But you can also automate the sharing of that data, and we have many customers who do that. And that is about 4 hours of work for the IT team to do that. So even whether you automate it or not, it's still quite a low IT resourced solution. And like I said, we take your lead on that. Whatever you want to do, we work with you to figure that out the best. I'll just pop up because Caroline asked a question early on. So are the calls made at different times/days of the week? Yes, absolutely. So we often like to say that the software is positively persistent. In that, if we can't get hold of them on one day, we will try the second day or the third day. And again, we work with you to set up the frequency of that contact to make sure that it's appropriate when we're reaching out to the tenant, but it also works for yourself as an organisation. And that's some of where that efficiency comes from, and where housing associations and local authorities really gain from that. Because previously, without the technology, an officer is having to remember or schedule that follow-up, schedule that thought in their mind to make sure that they're trying again with Mrs. Smith or Mr. Johnson. And the beauty of it is that actually with the technology, that is all automated going on in the background. So yes, absolutely.
I think, sorry, Luke, if I can just add to that one as well, because I think That really helps to, depending on what you're doing. So if you are having a return flow, so those calls are coming back in, if people are transferring, because you have the ability to schedule when those calls go out, you can mirror that with your quieter times for if they're coming back into a contact center, for example. So actually, because you can tailor that, you can help to manage your demand better as well. Because you know, we probably all have really busy times on a Monday morning in contact centers and inbound traffic. But with this, you can tailor when those calls go out, so you can manage that return flow better, and you haven't got people waiting on hold for long periods of time.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And Barry has asked, is it easy to use once set up? So I'll ask you, Chris, to answer that.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to use once set up. Once you've set it all up, once you've got your parameters agreed and set up. For us, it is uploading an Excel file into a web browser. That is essentially the hardest part, is uploading it, and then the system will take the file, it will process it in the background, and then it will start making those calls based on the settings you've got within the system for your calling window. In terms of accessing the reporting as well, because we made a conscious decision not to integrate with our housing management system, purely because we're going to review whether we continue with our current provider for housing management. So we didn't want to invest the setup to then, if we do leave. But in terms of accessing the reporting of numbers that don't work, it's a couple of clicks. To be fair, you're in a web browser and you can export the information. So I think it's one of the easiest systems I've used. And again, caveat to that is I've used the system in a few different employers, and I think everywhere I've been, regardless of scale, size, it's very easy to use.
Amazing, thank you. And I think also worth pointing out that each of our customers have a dedicated customer success manager, and that customer success manager is only focused on making sure that you're getting the best out of the solution. So they provide all the training, all the ongoing training, but they also share best practice as well. So, you know, if one customer is doing something and is having really great results, they'll share that with other customers to make sure you're getting the best out of the solution as well. So yes, easy to use, and you also have access to your customer success manager to carry out that training and that retraining, that refamiliarization as well, should you need it. Barry's also asked around can VoiceSkip carry out the API connections rather than our IT department? It's totally up to each organization how we set the solution up. And I think it's important, Barry, to know that you can change your mind. So exactly as Chris has said right now, they're manually uploading the data because they're reviewing their housing management system. But at the point that they make that decision and move to a new housing management system, they can then choose to work with us to automate that data sharing and that file upload and download. So it's totally up to each organization. Whatever decision you make in the first instance, we can look back and review it should you need to change that. Just looking, I don't think there's any more questions. So I just had a couple, Chris, if that's okay. So we've spoken a lot about, I guess, the impact on tenants. So the better customer experience, the easier access to the organization, and ultimately that has had some really positive outcomes, both in terms of reduction of no access, but also in terms of positivity from those tenants. But I'd be really interested to understand, because you sort of touched upon it, your engineers geographically, they're traveling quite a big distance. So I wondered if you knew, even anecdotally, whether there'd been any impact, any feedback from those engineers around the change in their job, going from perhaps some higher instances of getting to properties and not being able to get in to now, being more successful and getting more access.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you start with the premise of gas engineers don't become gas engineers because they want to put cards through letterboxes. They want to become gas engineers to maintain gas appliances and keep people safe. So the more that the organization can do to enable that, actually get a better job satisfaction for the operative as well, because there's nothing more disheartening than you've driven, in our case, potentially we're driving from Darlington to Hull, for a load of no access cases. And not only is it just wasted time on the road, actually from a satisfaction of the colleague point of view, actually it's a bit demoralizing as well. So the more we can do to improve that, it absolutely has avoided us making unnecessary journeys. So there was a particular case, this was in the first week that we used the system of one of our residents in York had received the first call, had accepted and confirmed the appointment, and then got the reminder text the day before to say that we're coming tomorrow. And actually, she was able to get in touch then and say, I'm really sorry, something's come up. I'm not going to be available for that. And that's absolutely great, because we would have driven to York, and that if we hadn't been using the system, the resident wouldn't have called us, because they'd already had the letter anyway. So if the letter was going to be the trigger, they would have already done that. But it wasn't. It was the reminder that then triggered the resident, and then we were able to reschedule that. And when you look at how we can schedule the work, we can schedule it when we're in the area, and it just really helped avoid that. And actually, we were able to bring forward other appointments into the window to be more productive. Whilst this isn't the only change we've made to gas servicing, we are probably 8 weeks ahead of the programme from where we were before we used it. And that's because we're helping to strip out some of that no access. Again, I'll stress this is not the only change. We've made other operational changes to gas that have impacted on that. But certainly this has been part of the journey that we've been able to strip out some of that wasted time, and we're now ahead. And it just gives us that more flexibility to deal with people who need individual vulnerabilities accounted for, or how we might need to do something a little bit different to make sure we can get in. We're all in the game for the right thing. We just want to keep people safe. And again, we don't employ gas engineers to put cards indoors.
Amazing. Thanks, Chris. And I guess I was also interested in understanding, I guess, the what if scenario. So, we talked about new pressures around consumer regulations, and of course, even regardless of the regulations, a desire for housing associations to make sure that they have safe and well-maintained homes, but also that tenants have access to services easier, and they can feed back in an easier way. And I guess I'm wondering, hypothesizing, the what if the technology wasn't there. If you decided as part of that transformation Railway Housing's been through that, you didn't implement the technology. How do you think things might be different today? What do you think might have changed, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, this is from a wider context because we're using multiple modules. But certainly from if we were trying to deliver the same level of service now manually, we would probably need to grow the team quite significantly to do that. Now, we're all facing the same cost pressures at the minute. We all want to invest in existing homes. We've got EPCC closing fast in terms of the deadline. We've got Awaab's law coming in imminently, and that will push up repair costs, particularly for contractors, because we need to respond more quickly. We've got the challenge to build 1 million new homes by the end of Parliament, and great news from the spending review last week. But actually, cost pressures are going up and up and are outstripping income because we're not seeing, rent increases are as they are. And again, the 10-year settlement is really helpful. But certainly costs are going up more than our income is. So the ability of using this technology helps us to continue to drive that experience further, and is helping us get in and keep people safe in a way that would simply probably cost us a number of times more if we were having to do it manually. And also the safeguards in the technology around the audit trail, the evidencing of what you've done, the evidencing of the attempts of contact are really helpful and are probably more accurate than if we were doing that manually. In fact, they are more accurate than if we were doing that manually. So it just helps with your record keeping as well. So I think we'd really struggle to deliver what we're delivering now, and it is helping us. We are and have been for some time now being 100% access on all of our compliance programs, and absolutely the system's played a part in that.
Amazing, thank you. Barry, just a couple of questions from yourself. So can VoiceGate carry out the API connections rather than our IT department? So for any data integration or sharing, if you want them to automate that, we do need the support of your IT department. And again, I would just say it's just about understanding what you're trying to achieve, and then we can agree how best to support you. We've got many customers using VoiceGate Compliance now, and over 100 customers using all of our pieces of software. They all work in a very similar way, so I've absolutely no doubt that we can support any housing association moving forward. Another question from Barry: is it just one date per upload when trying to make the bookings? I'm not sure what that means, Barry. So let me get an answer for you, and I'll follow up with you separately. But the gift, I would say, is within the data. So like I said at the beginning, very bare minimum, we just need a tenant reference number and a telephone number to point the call to, but you can include things within the data set that the system will ingest and read. So for example, the multiple times that you might speak to Mrs. Smith in that period, not just the initial outreach about booking the appointment, but also the follow-up text messages or calls to remind them about the appointment. That can be in one single data set, Barry. So hopefully that answers that question, but we can follow up separately after the call. And just check for any last questions. I think that's it. So let me just check if I've got any last questions for you, Chris, and I promise to stop interviewing you if I don't. No, I think that's it. So I guess we'll end it here. So Chris, thanks so much for joining us and sharing not only what you're doing right now at Railway Housing Association, but the bigger picture and I guess the future. And it's really amazing to see and even better to be a part of. So thank you for that. Like I said at the beginning, if there's anything that anybody in the webinar wanted to talk about beyond compliance, feel free to reach out. And also, Chris kindly offered to support as well. So if you wanted to speak to him directly about his experience, please, I encourage you to do that. And thank you again, Chris, for supporting. But otherwise, thank you for everybody for joining. We will be following up with the slide deck and the recording for those who couldn't attend, or if you wanted to share it with colleagues. But yes, thank you very much.